How many times have you felt the heat rise to your face after reading a comment? That email from a colleague with a veiled criticism, that message from a relative with unsolicited advice, or the opinion of a complete stranger on the internet about your life, your choices, your appearance. A wave of adrenaline courses through your body. Your fingers itch to respond, to defend yourself, to correct, to prove the other person wrong. We feel an almost biological urgency to fight, to protect our territory, to defend the image we have built of ourselves. It's a primitive instinct, the need to validate our existence in the face of others' judgment. In this constant battle, we live in a state of high alert. We hand over the key to our inner peace to anyone who decides to express a thought. We become reactive, spending precious energy on arguments that lead nowhere, with people who, most of the time, are not interested in the truth but only in projecting their own frustrations and insecurities. We believe that responding is an act of strength, that silence is an admission of defeat. But what if it's the exact opposite? What if true strength lies not in the eloquence of your reply, but in the sovereign wisdom of your silence? If you're searching for more emotional balance, clarity in your decisions, and want to learn how to better navigate life, this content is for you. So go ahead and like this video and subscribe to the channel, because with each video, you will grow stronger from within and see life with more wisdom. This is not a guide on how to win arguments, but on how to become so whole and self-assured that most arguments don't even need to begin. It's about learning to discern what deserves your energy and what should be treated with the indifference of the wind passing over a mountain. We spend our lives learning how to speak, to argue, to express ourselves. But perhaps the most important lesson for our peace is learning when to be silent. So, I ask you, are you ready to discover that your silence can be the most powerful and devastating response you have ever given? 1. The battle instinct. Why we feel the need to respond. The need to respond to an opinion that contradicts us is one of the most human and visceral reactions there is. It's not a character flaw, it's deep programming forged over millennia of evolution. Our brain at its core is a survival machine. When an opinion attacks our beliefs, our choices, or our identity, the brain doesn't interpret it as a simple set of words. It perceives it as a threat. The amygdala, our internal alarm center, fires up, flooding our system with cortisol and adrenaline, the hormones of stress and fight. In that instant, we are not rational beings pondering an argument. We are warriors on a battlefield, and our ego is the king that must be defended at all costs. I vividly remember a situation early in my career. I had spent weeks developing a project, investing nights and weekends. In the presentation meeting, a more senior colleague, known for his skepticism, listened in silence and at the end said with a condescending smile, "It's an interesting idea but a bit naive. It lacks market maturity." In that moment the world seemed to slow down. I felt my blood boil. My heart pounded in my neck. My mind raced, assembling an elaborate point-by-point defense, ready to annihilate his argument. I wanted to humiliate him with my logic, to prove that he was the one who was limited, not my idea. The tree of thought opened before me in a fraction of a second. Path A was the immediate response. I would interrupt him, list my data, cite my sources, perhaps even slide into a passive-aggressive tone, exposing his lack of vision. The short-term result would be a momentary relief for my wounded ego. But the long-term result? I would look defensive, insecure, perhaps even childish. The meeting would turn into a boxing ring, and the focus would shift from the project to the conflict. I would have won the small battle but lost the war for credibility and professionalism. Path B was silence. An uncomfortable, heavy silence. Letting his opinion hang in the air without validation or confrontation. Just a nod and a, "Thank you for your feedback, I'll consider it." This path was torture for my ego, which screamed for revenge. But strategically it was brilliant. It would maintain my composure, demonstrate confidence and emotional control, and allow his opinion to dissolve on its own lack of substance, or be challenged by others in the room, without me having to get my hands dirty. That day, by some miracle of self-control, I chose Path B. It was one of the hardest but most formative decisions of my life. I learned then that the impulse to respond doesn't come from a place of strength, but from a place of pain. It is the cry of our wounded ego, not the voice of our wisdom. The need to have the last word is proof that the other person's word has hit us deeply. When you feel that urgency, that visceral need to defend yourself, stop. Breathe. Ask yourself, who wants to respond right now? My calm, centered self or my bleeding ego? Most of the time, the answer will reveal that the best action is no action. True strength isn't about entering every battle, but having the wisdom to know which ones aren't even worth fighting. The first step to freedom is recognizing the chains of our own instinct. 2. The anatomy of an opinion. where does it really come from? Before we absorb or react to an opinion, we need to become detectives of the human soul, investigators of the other's psyche. An opinion is rarely a pure, objective observation of reality. More often than not, an opinion is a mirror. It is a reflection of the experiences, fears, limiting beliefs, frustrated hopes, and unfulfilled desires of the person giving it. An opinion says much more about the speaker than about the listener. When we don't understand this, we take on, as truth, the contents of an emotional baggage that does not belong to us. It's like accepting a beautifully wrapped gift, not knowing that inside is toxic waste. I learned this lesson in a rather painful way from a close relative. When I decided to leave a stable job to pursue a more autonomous and creative path, this person told me with an expression of genuine concern, "You're making a terrible mistake. You're going to regret this. Life isn't a fairy tale, you need security." Those words hit me like a punch to the gut. The doubt, which was already a small seed in my mind, was watered by this opinion and threatened to become a giant weed. My first reaction was anger. I wanted to list all my reasons, show my business plan, prove that I wasn't an irresponsible dreamer. But instead, after the initial shock, I decided to practice the anatomy of the opinion. I stepped back from the situation and began to analyze the source. Who was this person? They were someone who, for their entire life, had prioritized security above all else. Someone who had sacrificed their own dreams for a guaranteed paycheck. Someone who lived in fear of uncertainty and risk. Their entire life was built on the belief that stability is the greatest good. Suddenly their opinion changed color. It was no longer an attack on my decision. It became a confession of their own choices and fears. Their "you're going to regret this" actually meant, I would be too afraid to do what you're doing, and seeing you do it calls my own life decisions into question. Their concern was not purely about my well-being. It was also about their need to validate their own chosen path, a path that my choice indirectly challenged. It was a liberating revelation. Their opinion wasn't about me. It was about them. From that day on, I developed a mental filter. Before letting an opinion in, I ask myself, what is the source? What is the inner world of the person saying this? A chronically unhappy person will give opinions tinged with pessimism. An envious person will give opinions that seek to diminish your shine. A fearful person will give opinions that warn you of imaginary dangers. On the other hand, a person who has already walked the path you want to walk, who is successful and happy on it, will give an opinion that probably deserves to be heard carefully. Constructive criticism exists, but it is rare and usually comes from people who genuinely want what's best for you and who have the credibility to speak on the matter. Most of the opinions we receive day to day are just someone else's emotional noise. Learning to differentiate the signal from the noise is one of the most crucial skills for mental health. It's not about being arrogant or dismissive of everything, but about being a wise curator of your own mental space. You wouldn't let just anyone walk into your house and throw trash on the floor. Why do you let just anyone walk into your mind and dump their emotional garbage? 3. The currency of your energy, the hidden cost of reaction. We think of our time and money as finite resources. We manage our calendars, create budgets, and know we can't spend more than we have. Yet, we rarely apply this same logic to our most precious and invisible resource, our emotional and mental energy. Each day we wake up with a limited amount of this energy. And every interaction, every thought, every decision is a transaction. It either deposits energy or it withdraws energy from our account. Engaging in a pointless argument to defend your point of view from an unsolicited opinion is one of the most expensive and senseless withdrawals we can make. It's like using a $100 bill to light a cigarette. You are burning a valuable resource for zero or, even worse, negative returns. I remember a phase when I was addicted to online debates. I would spend hours on forums and social media, responding to strangers who disagreed with me on politics, philosophy, or any other topic. I saw myself as a paladin of truth, a warrior of logic. I spent my time researching data, building irrefutable arguments, writing long, detailed responses. I felt a pang of satisfaction when I believed I had won the argument, when the other person ran out of replies or resorted to insults, which, in my mind, was a sign of their intellectual defeat. What I didn't realize was the hidden cost of this victory. At the end of the day, I was completely exhausted. My creativity for my actual work was at zero. My patience with the people I loved was minimal. I was irritable, anxious, and my mind continued to replay the arguments long after I had turned off the computer. I was winning imaginary battles against anonymous avatars, but I was losing the war for my own peace and well-being. My energy account was chronically overdrawn. I was investing my vital capital in a bankrupt enterprise. The other person most of the time didn't change their mind. They probably didn't even read my entire response. I was shouting at a wall and I was the only one getting hoarse. It took me a long time to realize the futility of it all. The penny dropped when one day, after a long and tiring online debate, I looked at my child who was asking me to play, and I responded with sharp impatience. In that moment, I saw the transaction I had made with perfect clarity. I had traded the joy of a precious moment with my child for the empty need to prove a stranger on the internet wrong. It was one of the most shameful and clarifying moments of my life. Today, I treat my energy like a sacred treasure. Before engaging in any interaction, especially a potentially conflictual one, I ask myself, is this transaction worth it? Does the return I will get justify the energy expenditure? Responding to an internet troll? An extremely expensive withdrawal, zero return. Trying to convince a stubborn relative that their worldview is wrong? A very high withdrawal, likely a negative return. Arguing with a coworker over an irrelevant detail just for ego? An unnecessary withdrawal. On the other hand, having a difficult but necessary conversation with my partner to resolve a problem? It's a withdrawal, but the potential return is a stronger relationship. The investment is worth it. Life is too short and our energy is too finite to be wasted on battles that don't matter. Choosing not to respond to a provocative opinion isn't passivity. It's emotional financial intelligence. It's being a wise investor in your own peace of mind. It's looking at the provocation and saying with the calm of a billionaire, I'm sorry, but that's not in my budget. 4. Silence as a position of power. Reframing passivity. Our society has an uncomfortable relationship with silence. We associate it with weakness, submission, a lack of a comeback, defeat. In a meeting, the person who stays quiet is seen as uninterested. In an argument, the one who doesn't retort has lost. We fill every moment of our lives with noise, music, podcasts, conversations, notifications, because silence confronts us with our own thoughts and, in the context of a conflict, with our apparent powerlessness. This is one of the biggest and most debilitating lies we tell ourselves. Silence, when chosen consciously, is not a vacuum. It is a space filled with power. It is a strategic weapon, far more subtle and effective than the most articulate of responses. Silence is not the absence of a reply, it is the reply. I remember a tense negotiation I had years ago. I was across the table from an extremely aggressive and verbal person. He spoke loudly, gestured wildly, and tried to intimidate me with a barrage of arguments and demands. My natural reaction would be to mirror his energy, raise my voice, interrupt him, fight for my verbal space. I felt the adrenaline telling me to do exactly that. But instead, I remembered a piece of advice from an old mentor. In a storm, don't become part of it. Be the rock the storm hits. So, I did something that completely disarmed him. I remained silent. I would let him finish his long, aggressive sentences and, instead of responding immediately, I would pause. A pause of 3, 4, 5 seconds. I would look him in the eye, calmly, without anger, just with attention. In that silence, several magical things happened. First, he became solely responsible for the aggressive energy in the room. The silence created a contrast that exposed his lack of control. Second, without my reaction to fuel his fire, his aggressive words died in the air without an echo. He was fighting alone. Third, and most importantly, the silence made him uncomfortable. He expected a fight but found a void. And people, especially aggressive ones, hate a vacuum. They feel the need to fill it. So, he would start talking again, but this time, a little less certain, justifying himself, filling the silence I had created. I hadn't said a word, but I had shifted the entire power dynamic of the room. When I finally did speak, my voice was calm and my words, few and precise, carried immense weight because they came from a place of calm, not reaction. Strategic silence is a declaration of sovereignty. It says, your opinion and your energy do not have the power to move me. I operate from my own center on my own time. I will not dance to your war drum. When someone offers you a provocative opinion and you respond with silence, you are not submitting. You are refusing the very premise of the battle. You are communicating, on a much deeper level, that the game they want to play is too small for you. You are conserving your energy, your dignity, and your focus. Silence takes the power from the aggressor and returns it to you. It takes immense strength to resist the impulse to respond, far more strength than is needed to simply react. It is the strength of self-confidence, of self-control, of wisdom. The next time you are confronted, experiment with the power of the pause. Breathe. Create a space of silence. See it not as a passive shield but as an active force field. You will be surprised to find that often silence not only ends the argument, it wins it in a way that words never could. 5. Constructive criticism versus veiled attack. The art of discernment. Not every negative opinion is useless or malicious. To ignore everyone and everything indiscriminately is not wisdom, it's arrogance. There is a type of feedback, a form of criticism, that is an invaluable gift. It is constructive criticism, the kind that comes from a place of genuine interest in our growth, offered by someone who has the credibility and skill to show us our blind spots. The great challenge of adult life is to develop the discernment to differentiate this rare gift from its toxic and much more common cousin, the veiled attack, the destructive opinion disguised as help or sincerity. The inability to make this distinction leads us to one of two mistakes. Either we close ourselves off to any feedback, stagnating in our own bubble, or we open ourselves up to all kinds of poison, letting our self-esteem be eroded. The key to discernment lies in analyzing three elements: the intent, the messenger, and the content. The intent behind constructive criticism is always to build up. The person wants you to improve, to succeed. The intent behind a veiled attack is to diminish. The person, consciously or unconsciously, feels better by making you feel worse. You can feel the intent in the energy of the delivery. The first is like a surgeon's hand, cutting with precision to heal. The second is like an attacker's knife, stabbing to wound. The messenger is also crucial. Constructive criticism usually comes from someone we respect, someone who has already shown support and who has knowledge in the area in question. A mentor, a teacher, a true friend, a boss who invests in their team. The veiled attack, on the other hand, often comes from people with a history of negativity, envy, or competition. It's the coworker who always has a caveat for every achievement of yours. It's the relative who only points out the risks and never the possibilities. The messenger's credibility is a powerful filter. If the person criticizing your investment strategy has never invested a penny in their life, their opinion has a very different weight than that of an experienced investor. Finally, the content. Constructive criticism is specific, focused on the behavior or the work, not the person. It points out a problem and often suggests a path to a solution. For example, your report is well researched, but the conclusion could be stronger if you included data from the last quarter. The veiled attack is vague, general, and personal. It attacks your identity. You don't take things seriously, or you're always so disorganized. It points out the flaw but offers no path, only judgment. I had a striking experience with this. I had a boss who was brutally honest, but his criticisms were a gift. He would say things like, "Your presentation was good, but you used too much jargon. Simplify the language so the client can understand. Try rewriting these 3 slides." It was hard to hear, but it was actionable and made me a much better professional. In another job, I had a colleague who would say things with a sweet smile like, "I love your idea. It's so cute. Maybe one day it will work in the real world." The first criticism, though harsh, was constructive. I felt he wanted me to grow. The second, though disguised as a compliment, was a veiled attack, designed to make me feel small and naive. The first deserved my attention and my response in the form of action and improvement. The second deserved only my silence and my distance. Life constantly presents us with these two types of feedback. Our task is not to build an impenetrable wall, but to install a door with a very good peephole. Look through the door. Analyze the intent, the messenger, and the content. If it's a gift, open it with gratitude. If it's an attack, keep the door locked and leave the person outside with their opinion in their hand. Your peace depends on this curation. 6. The inner battlefield. The most dangerous opinion of all so far. We have talked about opinions that come from the outside. But there is a much more intimate and dangerous battlefield, where the cruelest and most relentless opinions are fired. This is the battlefield of our own mind. The inner critic, that tireless voice that narrates our failures, replays our mistakes, compares us unfavorably to others, and judges us with a harshness we would never use on a stranger. This voice is the most dangerous opinion of all because we cannot run from it. It lives with us. It knows all our insecurities. And worst of all, we tend to believe it as if it were the absolute truth. All the strategies we use to deal with external opinions must be applied, with even more diligence, to this internal voice. We must learn not to give it a response. We need to understand its anatomy, question its intent, and choose conscious silence instead of engaging in a self-destructive debate. For years, my inner critic was my tormentor. After any mistake, however small, it would begin its slaughter. "You're an idiot. How could you do that? Everyone noticed. You're not good enough. You're a fraud." I would respond to it. I would try to defend myself, to argue, to justify my actions. It wasn't that bad, but I was tired. "I'll do better next time." And in doing so, I validated its premise. I got in the ring with it and it always won because it knew all my weak spots. It was a cycle of self-inflicted torture that left me exhausted and with my self-esteem in tatters. The turning point came when I started applying the same logic of external silence to my internal world. I began to treat my inner critic not as the voice of truth, but as a separate interlocutor. A malicious and unreliable one. When the voice began its attack, "You failed again," instead of responding, I practiced detachment. I would observe the thought as if it were a dark cloud passing in the sky of my mind. I would label it, here's the inner critic again. A self-judgment thought. And then I would refuse to engage. I wouldn't argue. I wouldn't defend myself. I would simply turn my attention to something else, to my breath, to the work in front of me, to the sound of birds outside. I would respond to its attack with the silence of my attention. I let it scream into the void. At first, it was extremely difficult. The voice would get louder, trying to pull me into the fight. But with practice, something miraculous began to happen. The voice started to lose its power. Like a bully who loses interest when the victim stops reacting, my inner critic began to quiet down. It still shows up now and then, especially in moments of stress or fatigue, but now it's just background noise, not the main attraction. I also began to practice the anatomy of the internal opinion. Where does this voice really come from? I discovered it was an echo. An echo of the voices of parents, teachers, and authority figures from my past. They were the limiting beliefs I had absorbed in childhood and internalized as my own. The intent of this voice was not to protect me as it sometimes pretended. Its intent was to keep me safe in the comfort zone, preventing me from taking risks, from growing, from exposing myself to the possibility of failure. It was the voice of fear disguised as wisdom. Learning not to respond to your inner critic is perhaps the highest form of self-mastery. It is refusing to be both the aggressor and the victim in your own drama. It is treating yourself with a minimum of neutrality, if not compassion. The next time that voice starts whispering poison in your ear, don't fight. Don't argue. Just observe it, label it for what it is, noise, fear, an echo of the past, and gently withdraw your attention. Give it the gift of your silence. It is the most radical act of inner peace you can practice. 7. The arena of affection. Dealing with opinions from loved ones. There is one category of opinions that is infinitely harder to ignore. Those that come from the people we love. Our parents, our partners, our best friends. When a stranger on the internet criticizes us, we can use the shield of indifference. But when the criticism comes from someone whose love and approval are important to us, the wound is deeper and the impulse to react, to defend, to convince, to seek validation, is almost irresistible. This is the most delicate arena of all, where wisdom lies not in building a wall, but in learning the subtle art of maintaining a gate with a very good lock. To completely ignore the opinion of a loved one can be an act of arrogance and can damage the relationship. However, to passively accept all their opinions is an act of self-annihilation. The balance lies in listening with love, filtering with wisdom, and responding with clear boundaries. The first thing to understand is that, most of the time, a loved one's opinion comes from a place of love, but a love filtered through their own fears and experiences. It is a protective love which often fears change, risk, the unknown. My mother, for example, for a long time expressed concern about my career choices. Every time I spoke of a new project, I saw the anxiety in her eyes. But is it safe? What if it doesn't work out? For years this frustrated me. I would respond defensively, trying to prove to her that I knew what I was doing, which only created tension between us. The shift came when I learned to separate the intent, love, from the manifestation, the fear-based opinion. Instead of reacting to the content of her opinion, I started responding to the intention behind it. In one conversation, when she began to list all the potential dangers of a new venture, instead of saying, "Mom, you don't understand," I paused, looked at her, and said, "I know you worry about me and you say this because you love me and want what's best for me. And I thank you so much for that love and concern." That simple sentence changed everything. It disarmed the conflict before it could start. She felt heard and validated in her feeling of love. And only after validating her intention did I gently set my boundary. I continued, "And it's precisely because I also love myself and want what's best for me that I'm making this choice. I know the risks, I've studied them, and I feel prepared. I need you to trust me." I wasn't asking for her approval, nor was I trying to convince her I was right. I was validating her love while simultaneously affirming my autonomy. With people we love, complete silence can be interpreted as indifference or anger. Therefore, a response is often necessary. But the response doesn't have to be a defense of your point of view. The response can be a loving boundary. It can be, "I love you and I value your opinion, but this is a decision I need to make for myself. Or, can we agree to disagree on this? I don't want it to affect our relationship. Or, in cases of repetitive, draining criticism, I know you think that, you've told me before. I'm asking that, from now on, we don't discuss this topic anymore, for the sake of our relationship. This is infinitely more powerful than trying for the 1,000th time to prove you are right. You are shifting the focus of the discussion from the content of the opinion to the health of the relationship. You are saying, I value you more than I value being right in this argument. It is an act of maturity that protects both your peace and your connection. Dealing with the opinions of loved ones requires the softest heart and the strongest spine. To welcome the love but not necessarily the advice. That is the delicate dance of freedom within affection. 8. The Digital Coliseum. Surviving opinions on social media. If the world was already an opinionated place, the internet has turned it into a global coliseum, where every post is a gladiator thrown into the arena to be judged by the crowd. Social media has created a culture of instant, shallow, and often brutal opinion. Anonymity or semi-anonymity gives people a courage they wouldn't have face-to-face, and the algorithm rewards engagement, whether positive or negative. In this environment, the temptation to respond to every criticism, every sarcastic comment, every misinformed opinion, is a trap that can consume our mental sanity. To survive and thrive in this digital coliseum requires a radically different battle strategy. One of extreme selectivity and deliberate detachment. When I first started my online presence, I read every single comment. And I responded. I thanked the praise and, especially, I responded to the criticism. I tried to explain my point of view to those who misunderstood, correct information for those who were mistaken, and debate with those who disagreed. I believed it was my duty as a content creator to engage with my audience. The result was a disaster for my mental health. I spent my days in a state of reactivity, my mind occupied with formulating responses to strangers. A single negative comment could ruin my day, overshadowing hundreds of positive ones. I was handing over control of my emotional state to an endless stream of random opinions. My survival strategy evolved in stages. The first was that of the minimal response. I stopped writing paragraphs and started using short, almost robotic replies. But I was still engaging, still spending energy. The second stage was non-engagement. I simply stopped responding to negative comments. I would read them, feel the sting of pain or anger, and force myself to move on. It was better, but the poison was still getting in. I was still reading, still being affected. The third and most liberating stage was that of ruthless curation, which I call, and bloom. I realized that my online space is an extension of my home. I am not obligated to tolerate rudeness, negativity, or disrespect in my own space. Today my policy is simple. If a comment is constructive, even if critical, I read it carefully. If a comment is simply disagreeable but respectful, I leave it there as part of the diversity of thought. But if a comment is disrespectful, aggressive, sarcastic, passive-aggressive, or simply emanates a toxic energy, I do not respond. I do not debate. I do not try to educate. I simply press 2 buttons, delete comment and user. Without ceremony. Without guilt. Many might call this creating a bubble, or being unable to handle criticism. I call it mental hygiene. I call it gardening. I am actively pulling out the weeds so that the flowers can grow. In doing so, I not only protect my own peace, but I also cultivate a healthier community. People learn that this space does not tolerate toxicity, and trolls move on to other places where they can get the reaction they crave. My response to their opinion is not a counter-argument, it is my absence. It is the silent removal of their platform. It is the clearest possible message. Your opinion not only doesn't deserve a response, it doesn't even deserve to exist in my space. This may seem like a radical approach, but the digital environment is a radical environment. You cannot use living room conversation rules in a coliseum. Protect your digital space with the same ferocity you would protect your home. Your sanity will thank you. Bloom where you are planted, and don't be afraid to pull out everything that threatens your growth. 9. The freedom of sacred indifference. The ultimate goal throughout this journey, we have explored strategies for dealing with unwanted opinions. Silence, analyzing the source, managing energy, setting boundaries. These are all powerful and necessary tools. However, they still operate at the level of management. They help us deal with the impact of an opinion after it hits us. But there is a higher state and ultimate goal in this practice. It is a place where most opinions simply no longer land. Not because we have built a thicker shield, but because we have become transparent. The opinion passes right through us, finding nothing to cling to. This is the state that some call equanimity, and that I like to call, with a touch of reverence, sacred indifference. Sacred indifference is not apathy. Apathy is the absence of feeling, a state of numbness. Sacred indifference is a state of profound peace that comes from a self-worth so solid and a self-knowledge so deep that external validation or criticism become largely irrelevant. It's not that you don't hear the opinion, it's that it no longer has the power to disturb your inner state. You observe it with a detached curiosity, like a scientist watching a chemical reaction in a test tube, without becoming emotionally invested in the outcome. Reaching this state is not an event, it's a gradual process, the result of a long and consistent practice of everything we have discussed. It's what happens when you repeatedly stop responding, when you consistently protect your energy, when you unfailingly honor your boundaries. You begin to build an inner confidence so robust that it no longer needs external props. You know who you are. You know your values. You know your path. And because you know yourself so deeply, the image that others have of you loses its power. I remember the moment I felt the first real glimpse of this. Someone made a rather scathing criticism of my work in a public forum. In the past, this would have consumed me for days. But on that day I read it and I felt almost nothing. There was a brief mental acknowledgement, this person thinks that, and then a gentle letting go. There was no adrenaline spike, no planning of a response, no rumination. It was like watching a cloud pass by. I didn't forcefully ignore it. I just genuinely didn't care on a visceral level. It was one of the most liberating moments of my life. I felt that I had finally become the sovereign of my own inner kingdom. Sacred indifference manifests as an unshakable calm. You can hear the harshest criticism or the most effusive praise, and your center remains still. You appreciate the praise without letting it inflate your ego, and you hear the criticism without letting it puncture your self-esteem. You become like a mountain. The mountain does not react to the storm, the wind, or the scorching sun. It simply is. It remains in its majesty, indifferent to the weather that passes over it. This is the ultimate goal of the practice of not responding. It is not about winning arguments or looking strong. It is about becoming truly free. Free from the need for approval. Free from the fear of rejection. Free from the burden of managing the perceptions of others. It is a lifelong work. There will be days when we are the mountain and days when we are the leaf in the wind. But holding this aspiration to cultivate this indifferent and sovereign peace already changes everything. Freedom is not having all the answers. It's realizing that most questions and opinions don't even need one. It's finding peace in the silence of your own unshakable truth. We have traveled a long way today. We began with the itch in our fingers to respond to a criticism and ended in the majestic peace of the mountain, in the silence of sacred indifference. We have seen that the need to respond comes from our wounded ego, not our strength. We have learned to dissect an opinion, to protect our energy, to use silence as power, and to set boundaries even with those we love. We have discovered that the fiercest battle is fought within our own minds. The core theme is this: your peace is your most sacred possession, and you have the absolute power to decide who or what is allowed to disturb it. True sovereignty is not controlling what others say or think. It is controlling what you do with what they say or think. Will you allow a stranger's opinion to dictate your mood? Will you spend your life force on battles that cannot be won? Will you continue to give the power of your happiness to others? Or are you ready to take that power back, to become the guardian of your own inner sanctuary? I propose a practical and powerful challenge for you. In the coming week, pay attention. There will be a moment when you receive an unsolicited opinion, a veiled criticism, a provocation, and you will feel the impulse to respond. In that exact moment, I want you to stop. Take 3 deep breaths, and consciously choose to do nothing. Do not respond. Do not justify yourself. Just observe the impulse, let it pass through you like a wave and remain in silence. Then observe what happens. Observe the energy you have saved. Observe the sense of power and control that silence gives you. Now, I want to hear your wisdom. Your experience is valuable. Tell me in the comments, what was a time you chose not to respond and felt most powerful? What lesson did your silence teach you? Your story could be the inspiration someone else needs to fight their own battle for peace. If this message resonated in your heart, if you felt a call to a more peaceful and sovereign life, please leave a like so this content can reach more people. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. With each video, we will take another step together on this journey of inner strengthening. Always remember, your response is a gift, and not everyone deserves to receive it.